Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Robinson again, and we're going to continue our studies. This time we're talking about significant figures. Some people call it significant digits, so let's get started. Significant figures are those digits used to determine the measure and excludes those zeros that are used as placeholders at the beginning of a decimal fraction at the end and at the end of an integer. So let's get some rules for those digits. So rules for determining those significant figure digits. So the first thing, all non-zero digits are significant. So if it's not zero, it is significant. All zeros between digits, significant digits, are significant. So if it's caught up in the middle of a couple numbers, a zero caught up in the middle of them, it is significant. All zeros at the end of a decimal fraction are also significant. So the zeros at the end do count. And make sure you have a decimal point. Zeros that precede the first non-zero digit in a decimal fraction are not significant. So that means the zeros in the front, they're not significant. And we'll see some examples of that. Zeros at the end of an integer may or may not be significant. That's because sometimes they have a dot placed over the zero and it will be significant. So let's look at some examples, see if you can figure it out. So fill in the chart for significance figures. So we have 104. Well, the 0 is in between the 1 and the 4, so I would say there are three numbers that are significant: the 1, the 0, and the 4. And 4 is a non-zero number, and so it's definitely going to be counted with the 0. So that's why it's 3. Now this one, 140. Now there is no decimal point, so I'm not going to count this 0. So I know it looks like there should be three numbers here, but we can't count the 0 because there is no decimal point, because it's not a decimal fraction, it's an integer. So we cannot use this one. So it's just the 1 and the 4. Those are the only two numbers that are significant. Now look at this one. We got zeros in the front and we have a 13 at the end. Well, definitely the 1 and the 3 are significant, but these preceding zeros, and we said preceding, those are the ones that are before that we cannot count. So they are not significant, because we would read this as 13,000. So we would read that with the 1 and the 3, not with the preceding zeros. So there are two numbers, the 1 and the 3, that are significant. All right, this is 5,001. And as we saw before, the 0 was caught up between the 1 and the 4. This time, two zeros are caught up between the 5 and the 1. So I'm going to say there are four numbers that are significant. All right, let's look at this one. Be careful now. 90,000, it's a large number. So I'm tempted to say all of them, but there is no decimal point to indicate significance, and that makes this an integer. So since it's an integer, I cannot count all these zeros at the end. So I'm going to count just one number, which is the 9, and ignore all of the zeros at the end because there's no decimal point. So sorry, it's only one number that's significant. So remember, if there's a decimal point, you can include it. But if there is no decimal point, you cannot include it because it's not a decimal number. All right, let's try this one. 1,001. Well, that's like this 5,001, so that's going to have four numbers that are significant. 10. Looks like we have two numbers, but there is no decimal point again, so unfortunately I got to ignore the 0 again. So I'm going to say 1. So hopefully you understood what we just did. Check over your rules, and if you understand it, great. If you're not sure, rewatch this video or write down your questions, bring them in, and we'll be glad to answer them. Here's one for you to try. See if you can figure out which one of these are significant. We'll go over them in class. Check your understanding. Here's one. Find the number of significant figures in the number 9,070, and there's a decimal point over the 0 at the end. Well, I remember it's an integer, but there's a point at the end. And I remember the last rule says if there's a point over the 0 at the end, then that makes it significant. So I'm tempted to say 4. So let's drag that 4 over here. So 4 significant figures, digits. So 4 sig figs. And there we have it. Just remember, when you have a decimal point on top of a 0 at the end, and I don't know how many times you see it, but there's one. So you get to count that as a significant number. So I hope you enjoyed the video and got something out of it. If you have questions, bring them in, and I'll be glad to answer them in class. So this is Dr. Robinson signing off. I'll see you in class. Bye-bye.